Welcome to the HealthSpark, igniting healthcare management change and evolution. I'm your host, Dr. Raya. Hi, this is Dr. Raya, and today on the HealthSpark, I have Alex Shahrestani. Did I say that right?
Pretty close. Pretend the second H isn't there, and it's a lot easier.
Shahrestani.
Yep, there you
Great.
go.
Alex Shahrestani. He's the founding partner of Promise Legal PLLC, a firm serving business startups by helping them take legal steps they need to launch. Welcome, Alex. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Ginger. Yeah, I'm excited to be here and grateful for the invitation.
We're so excited to have you. So first, I always want to start by introduce yourself to us. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your story.
Okay, yeah. I'll give you the shortest version I can come up with. So we might be here for a while, but yeah. So I am an attorney, but I'm also a developer of software, and I got my start with an education back in 2008 in computer science. And that was a decision I made specifically so I could be the attorney who understood technology. So that was like after I'd made my decision to go to law school, I was like, I'm going to know the tech. I want to be the guy who can speak about it in an intelligible way. Um, and I thought that would be it. I thought it would be about talking about technology with my clients, but I just loved it. I get a real rush out of programming, which is I know a really odd thing to say, but it's like a challenging puzzle, and there's like a set time when you know that you've succeeded, and you have something almost tangible in front of you, and so that sort of stuck with me, and so all the way through law school and through today, I've been an active developer. And most recently, since about 2019, I've been working on AI development products, particularly for use in my firm. Some of them released commercially with varying degrees of misfire, but yeah, nonetheless, it's a constant part of my practice. And uh, other things that it's informed is sort of a stance I've taken within the legal industry as a leader on technology adoption within the practice of law, from leadership on various state bar sections, which is our regulatory authority, to founding the Academic Journal of Law and Technology at UT Austin's law school. It's become a defining feature of my career, and I gotta say it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, super cool. So when you and I first met, you were telling me about some of the other cool things you were doing, and I was really interested in how you got involved with the National Science Foundation. So can you talk to me about how did that happen?
Yeah. It's a great question because it was like almost an accident. So I often get people reaching out to me, whether LinkedIn or via email or through an introduction, about their legal tech product. So someone wants to hear whether I think it's a good idea or if there's like a better way to approach a particular problem, and trying to bring a solution to attorneys. This one guy reached out to me. I think it was like early in the year, like maybe January or February, just to sort of understand whether his particular legal tech product had a place in a firm like mine. And ultimately, the answer was no. But then, I obviously have a lot of thoughts on legal tech and like, how do you get lawyers to adopt these technologies when it's a really slow moving industry? And we just sort of hit it off. And he was a local guy to me here in Austin. And he was at the end of the call, he was like, you know what? I'm going through this program with my company through the National Science Foundation. Would you be interested in being our industry mentor? And I was like, yeah, sign me up. Just let me know. And so he reached out to me again as they were gearing up for that program. And I jumped on board and got to go along for the ride. And it was really awesome, honestly, to go through that program and see what the NSF was putting into their curriculum, which did match a lot of what I've seen in other venture capital type spaces. So accelerators, incubators, things like that. But they did have a very specific scientific-esque approach, and they really hammered on it. And their big ask for the program was every participant have at least 100 interviews with different people about whether their solution was workable. And it was eye-opening for sure to see how differently everyone answered. And you realize by the end of the program, which of course is the point, that 100 interviews is not enough. Like it's enough to maybe to make some changes, but it's not the end of the story. And that was an awesome thing to be a part of.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, so AI and the legal side of it. So talk to me about why privacy is a concern with the use of AI first, and then I want to talk about how that why that's a concern in regards to healthcare. So two
Okay.
parts.
Yeah. So okay, specifically privacy in healthcare, correct?
Yeah, but I mean, what's the concern with AI
In
privacy
general.
in general first?
Okay. Yeah. So first in general, there's a lot of news stories that are out there and various headlines that I'm sure you've seen. Leading up to my education in the law, I would read news articles and be like, wow, they really know a lot about these topics as reporters, right? And then you get to a certain point of your career where you're like an expert in whatever they're reporting on. You're like, that's pretty right, but it's not like fully right. There's some nuance that's lost, or there's clearly some misunderstandings. And a lot of the headlines you see about privacy in the use of I think are lacking in some of that context. And
Okay.
so let's start with those. So the privacy concerns there are that everything you do that touches AI is automatically gobbled up by this machine that will then spit it out to somebody else. There was like a whole year where that was like the common headline, and it's not really true. There are some mechanisms by which your data can become part of a data set, but these blanket statements are more often than not actually incorrect.
Okay.
So let's like sort of put that on pause and go into some of the more realistic concerns,
Mhm.
and that should sort of highlight why that first segment is wrong, and then get into a little bit of what the real concerns are.
Okay.
um so generally speaking, with the use of AI, all the major players provide options for you to opt out of that training or require an opt-in in the first place.
Okay.
This is very similar to other technology that has been on the market for decades, right? So those end user license agreements, like when you install a software on your network, um, the terms of use when you sign on to a website, all of these things are examples of instances where companies almost certainly are asking if they can look at your data to improve their product. It's the same request. The the additional risk is that if the AI is trained on this information, it might potentially return a piece of that information to another user who otherwise wouldn't be allowed to see it.
Hmm.
So say it's like a person without a right to your patient's medical information, right? Like that is one of the concerns of opting into a program like this. So in most cases, you can opt out. Like in all the major cases, at least, you can definitely opt out, and it's not an issue. So there, instead of it being added to some model database where it can potentially be leaked to someone else, in most cases, and this is true for most services that are privacy forward, but are not fully end-to-end encrypted and like sort of encrypted all the way down to the bottom, which most services cannot be.
Okay.
Um, in those cases, there are people who can still see that data. And that can be like a scary realization until you realize sort of what is practically happening. So, practically speaking, the data that is visible on the back end to some website administrator is there for them to fix problems. So
Mhm.
if you've ever used a piece of software and something has crashed, or perhaps like you're trying to log a particular type of information, and for whatever reason that particular piece of information is breaking, the people who provide you the software need to be able to see what you were doing in order to figure out why it's breaking.
Right.
So that's like the type of collection that is fairly common even in privacy forward contexts. And that type of information might still be captured by these major companies, although that data is not being fed back into the model.
Okay.
I think that is less scary. It's something to be aware of, but it's not really a scary privacy violation. It's not about understanding your client's information. It's about providing the service.
Okay.
Um, there are other mechanisms by which privacy can be preserved to a higher degree than even that. So a lot of these AI models are built on top of some form of open source, which is like there's a very specific definition, but I'm going to talk about the general layperson definition, which is basically software that many people can contribute to from all over the world. It's like crowdsourced information, kind of like Wikipedia, with some more controls in place. And then typically a license is granted to anyone who wants to use that software. Um, because of that, um, there is a ecosystem where you can take these open source models and open source infrastructure and have your own AI living on your own computer. So really no one sees anything. And that if your real pushback is like, well, I am really a stickler about people having access to my data, there are ways in which you can still have access to these great tools and nobody can see your data except for you and your own tech team.
Hmm. Okay. Fascinating. So then what about in relation to healthcare then? Or was that your healthcare answer also?
So, yeah. So, in relation to healthcare, it's largely going to be the same issue.
Okay.
It's going to be the same issues, right? Like it's about the type of data that you're willing to put in there. So,
Mhm.
in my case, in the case of legal information, when I'm working with a client, very similar to like doctor-patient privileges, like we have privileges as well in confidentiality standards, which beyond like just the legal right of our clients, we have a duty to not disclose certain kinds of information. So we have a really high sort of baseline of what we're allowed to do with data. I think I think within those various levels of privacy, there is a permissive structure to what you can do. So I think if you don't opt out of data being trained, I think you are definitely doing a violation level thing. If you are doing one of the other two things, there could be some fear about the middle one, right? About where you opt out, but there's these like some level of like administrator on the back end can see your data. But the problem is that it has not been squared with all the other tech that you're using. Most of the other tech you're using has this same problem, and I think like tracking what's going on in that world is going to serve you well with these sort of like opt-out mechanisms. If you opt out with these and it's okay to do that in these other contexts, you're probably okay. To the extent that you're not, you're going to want to self-host stuff. In terms of medical data in particular, I think the real issues are not so much the privacy. So I think the privacy question is more of a straightforward one, I guess I would say. And I think the issues with AI are how the AI actually works. So I think there's a lot of confusion about what AI is actually doing underneath the hood
Yeah.
that causes more trouble than the actual privacy questions do.
Okay. Like what?
Yeah, okay, just making sure I'm not. So I will get into this topic and I will blow past some things that I take for granted that other people might not know. So that's what that pause is
Notes.
about.
So
But
yeah,
so
yeah.
okay.
Notes.
So so with generative AI in particular, which is I assume the bulk of what people are familiar with,
Yeah.
what the AI is doing is it's taking all of the information that is out there that has been provided to it, and it's trying to create a model for predicting what comes next. So
Mm,
have you ever on your like cell phone, you go to like type a message to somebody
right.
and it tells you what the next word should be?
Yeah.
That's essentially what generative AI is doing.
Okay.
Um, if you're building your own model, if you're training it on your own data or whatever, it's going to be more specific to you. There are a number of models out there that are built specifically for medical usage. Those have a lot of traction, including in the generative AI space. But what you get into is these issues of bias, which I know is like a conversation that happens in the field of healthcare.
Yeah.
So I'm going to show my ignorance with like what I say, I'm sure, but I know there's like a clear difference between the amount of studies on fertility treatments for men and for women. And I know that various subsets of the population are understudied, and like certain conditions are
That's well said.
ignored and all of that, right? So the data is
Cute.
not representative of everybody. And with generative AI, because it's taking all this data that's been given to it and then trying to predict what should come next based on what it's seen before, you're going to miss a lot of stuff where bias has been present in the data that's been provided. So that I think is like the biggest risk. The other sort of complementary problem is that not all data is created equal. So like ignore the bias part of it, right? So if you're doing a study on a random sampling of, every adult in the United States, you're going to get a different generative prediction than if it's all women between the ages of 18 and 29 in Southern California, right? And depending on the context of the question, one data set might perform better than the other. So it's important to be aware of the purpose of the AI. And I think a lot of these AI questions on like accuracy and fairness and all this stuff come down to understanding the data that went into it. And I think that's something that every person who uses AI should be asking questions about.
Excellent. I love that. That's amazing. So thank you so much for clarifying that. My next question was going to be, was privacy the biggest risk in AI? But I think the bias question comes up often. And I think, when you consider things like clinical trials and who's historically represented in like clinical trials, right? It's not everybody. So bias surely, comes up in those types of data sets.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. And then that problem can be amplified as well. So with technology, it's often the case that new problems are not introduced. It's just that the scope of old problems has like amplified significantly in some cases, right? Like bias of one doctor who read like one bad report is much different than bias in a model that thousands of doctors rely on, right? Like it's a scope problem.
yeah.
I think bias is one of the big problems, but then the other thing is this synthetic data problem, which is where technical practitioners who are trying to build specific types of models, uh, often are trying to generate data based on small sets of data. So like when you're working with a generative AI model or any AI model, it's really based on having a large amount of data, and then the model algorithmically runs through this process of trying to guess what the correct answer to a particular question or problem might be, and then checking it against the actual data and saying, okay, that was wrong. We need to tweak something about this process. And it does that like a million times until it gets a pretty good sense of how to predict an answer.
Mm.
Um, so what people will do to try and create these specialized tools is they'll take a smaller set of data, they'll give it to an AI and say, here is a subset of data. Let's create some other hypothetical examples of data that fall within these norms, based on this like smaller set of data, try and create a bigger set of data, basically. So
Right.
permutations of the data, maybe some outlying pieces of information, like things that represent what a real data set might look like.
Mm.
But the problem becomes, any bias that was present in the data gets like amplified 1,000 times because the whole data set is based on this like biased piece of data. The
Wow.
other is that it can lead to uh, the problem has gained a name that I recently learned. It's called model collapse, where the data that is being fed to the AI models is data that was generated by AI models rather than human beings, like with scientific hats on, or whatever the purpose of the model is, like not generated in not a new creative piece of content, right? It's something that was generated based on old data. And then that stuff inevitably gets vacuumed up into the model itself. And so the model gets introduced to this problem of data being added to it that is not sound data. It's meant to be like a shortcut to create something else.
Hmm.
Um, but it becomes part of like a quote unquote valid data set. So a good example of this would be like article content. So when you go and you search for, maybe there's something that you know of, and but you need to like go look it up real quick, to refresh your memory or whatever, you come across these articles that are like so clearly written by a bot, and you're like, oh, that's not very good content. And then you like refine your search, like something about it seems off, you go and you find like whatever the correct piece of information is, which was probably written by a professional practicing in the same area as you, or in that adjacent area that you're looking for a refresher on. The AI doesn't know how to do that. So the AI that is like sucking up all this data is also finding that result and being like, oh, there's a valid answer. And then it's also finding maybe that better result and saying there's another valid answer, and it becomes part of the model. So it makes the accuracy, or like the depth of the knowledge fuzzier.
Hmm. It's diluted somehow, huh?
Yeah,
Excellent.
diluted.
So my next question was going to be, how can healthcare leaders responsibly embrace and adopt AI? So, uh,
Yeah. Easy question. Okay. Yeah. So I think there actually is a very straightforward answer. Depending on your level of cost tolerance. Let's assume like a high level of cost tolerance where, tens of thousands of dollars is not, such a big deal. It's not nothing, but it's, within the realm of possibility. I
okay.
would just self-host an AI system that it is a beta, it is probative of how it might be used in your practice, but there is like no more risk of data disclosure than is already present on your infrastructure. So I think that is like a very simple way to safely create a playground to like learn how you're going to work with it, because that's an important piece. You can't leave the people out of it. It's got to be process oriented. Like, how are people actually going to use this is always different than like, hey, if they use this, how great would it be? So
Yeah.
that is, I think, a problem that needs to be sort of addressed before you just start dropping AI into your practice.
Yeah.
Um, Say that's not the case. Say you're like an individual practitioner, GP, or whatever the case might be. I think there are a number of use cases that you can start with that are going to be a bit safer, and also get you well versed in how this all works and like where it might be useful for you. One is client communication. So that's something that I use it for, is basically clients send me emails, and you know I want to answer them all day long, but there's just not the bandwidth, and I don't want my clients to wait for an inordinate amount of time for an answer to a relatively simple question. Like, sometimes the answer to the question is no, but you're not going to just email your client the word no, right? And like that's what makes it such a problem. So generative AI in that case is a useful one. So I have it set up to where um, email comes into my inbox. It will look at my past conversations with the person. It looks at my other kinds of answers, and it generates a draft. It doesn't send anything. It doesn't go anywhere. But when I get an email to my inbox, a draft is drafted up immediately. And so if it's one of those things where it's like a very simple answer, and like I otherwise would put it at the bottom of the pile, it's ready to go, and I can just vet it with my eyes and click send. That's great. It's
Nice.
fantastic to like take some of that off of my plate. But it doesn't send automatically, so you're not at risk of like misstating something any more than you already are, right? Like that is a good time saving solution. Another one is drafting notes. So often when I'm having a meeting with someone where I need to be taking notes, you've all seen these in like Zoom calls or in Meet calls where someone's note taker joins the conversation, right? Like, yeah, I do the same thing, but basically I will transcribe the meeting and then just drop it in and say, make meeting notes for me to my opted out chat GPT
Yeah.
instance, and it'll spit out notes for me, and I just pop it into my calendar alongside whatever the meeting was, and then in the future when I need to refer to those notes, they're there. It's another very simple one where I know the scope of damage that could be potentially had is very minimal, and like I sort of know this is like a secure enough approach. So I think that's like a good place to start if like budget is a concern, is like admin style stuff.
Yeah.
But then, once you get more comfortable and confident, you won't need someone like me to tell you how to implement AI in your practice. You'll get there. Although, like, you'll hear some people talk about stuff now, which might make it feel a bit more worthwhile to even dip your toe in. But I think like the simplest thing I can say is that AI is a new tool of the future. I think it's here to stay. And so learning now is gonna benefit you one way or the other.
Excellent. Okay, so you made some great points, right? So to recap, privacy maybe, well, privacy isn't the greatest concern with AI, right? There's other issues we need to be aware of, things like bias, understanding, um, you know, that that huge amount of data sets could be muddled, and that there's a lot of bias in that, and that you understand that that's what's happening, right? It could be happening.
Yes, and then I would say there's one other piece, and that's understanding the purpose of the AI you're working with and not
Okay.
trying to go beyond that is also a big concern. I think misunderstanding and misapplying AI is
Shoot.
that's another one of the biggest problem areas. It's
Okay.
just user error.
So is it that people are just trying to like use chat GPT across the board for things it's not appropriate for versus apply
Yeah.
one?
Yeah, that's a good example. Like, let's start with Chat GPT. So I give a lot of talks on this to attorneys on what AI is and how it's different than a search engine. That is like my big talking point at the very beginning.
Hmm.
Um, when you when you're using Chat GPT, it's not retrieving a particular piece of information and serving it to you. It's trying to predict what the right answer is. So like you type in your question and it's assuming that it found the document, and in the same way that your phone shows you what the next word might be,
Mm-hmm.
the AI is like, well, these are the next words based on, your query.
Yeah.
Um, versus in a search engine where you type in what your search is and then you find a page with static sets of information that has an answer that's prepared trying to answer that specific question. But at the end of the day, at the end of these talks, I always get questions of like, how can I trust that it has the right answer? And they'll give me an example like, oh, I was trying to write a trivia contest for a nonprofit event, and I told it to come up with 10 questions, and then I asked for the answers to the questions, and then I asked it if its answers were right, and it said no. So how can I trust anything it says? And I was like, you guys, it is not returning this information. Like, so to anyone who was like right along with that guy who was like, oh yeah, like how can I trust this information? Like I like to think of it as a way to like synthesize information, right? Like that is how I use it. So or to clarify the phrasing of something. That's like a legal use case, right? So one example might be, oh, I'm trying to find a way to say a particular thing. And so I'll type into ChatGPT what I'm trying to say, and then I'll say, what's the word for that, right? Like that is a good use case of it.
Okay.
Another one might be here, I'm taking pieces of information and putting it together. So the example would be like meeting notes, right? So it's transcribing what's being said, put it into meeting notes. It's pulling from that information I've given and synthesizing a response. So I'm not putting it in there to like do a math problem for me. It's not that kind of tool. It's really something that can extrapolate from something that it's been given and provide it to you in a presentable format or a transformed sort of format. That's like more or less what you can think of it
Excellent.
as doing.
Okay. Use AI appropriately.
Yes.
Definitely. Okay, great. Right. So am I missing anything else about the use of AI and how we should safely adopt it, especially in healthcare?
Missing anything else?
Covered
I'm sure we are.
covered a
I'm
lot.
sure we are. I'm trying to think
Covered a
what,
lot.
yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything in particular. Um,
I
I
was
think,
privacy with the risks at a high level.
yeah, I think so I don't know the medical industry as well as I know the legal industry. I know there is a lot of reticence to use new technologies quite a bit. I don't know if is that the same in the medical profession? Have you found?
Oh, I feel like when there's new technology, there's a lot of people are very risk averse to use it at first. They want people to try it out first, and unless I like your word about cost tolerance, unless you've got a lot of cost tolerance, people aren't anxious to like, oh, let's all try it. They want to make sure that it's been vetted out first. So I think their risk aversion is a
Yeah.
go.
Okay. So maybe it's the same pool of people applying to medical school and law school. Just some did better in English, some did better in math. I don't know, but yeah, we are very risk averse people as well, and I think okay. There's a couple of things I would say. So one, I think the risk aversion in some ways is like a good personality trait to have. Like I think that's part of why like you're successful as a doctor, as a lawyer, right? Like you're spotting potential problems
Mhm.
and you're trying to help people plan around them, right? Like that's at root more or less what's going on.
Yeah,
But I think the risk aversion to technology in terms of productivity tools, I think is often overblown. Like I can't think of, I mean, maybe they just like fall into obscurity, so I'm failing to find an example, but I can't think of really a productivity tool that has like come out and like changed how every other business is going that ultimately wasn't usable in the
mm,
legal profession and I assume the medical profession. Whether that's like spreadsheets or billing software or whatever, it's all ultimately it all comes out to like, okay, this works. And along the way, there are maybe, some bad actors who like do something weird with your data or like they're not trustworthy. And like that is always a risk. And that is something worth trusting your gut on if you're a risk averse person. But uh I would say that like adopting is more than likely just going to keep you up to speed with how things are going.
great, great.
The other thing, oh man, there was one that I really wanted to say to you all, and it's totally slipping my mind. Dang, I'm gonna wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and be like, I didn't say it. Why didn't I say it at the time? Oh, we were talking about what else we need to discuss, risk aversion. Oh, yes. Okay. So, obviously I'm like super into this space and I go to a lot of talks on AI and the law, AI on health, AI and everything, right? Like I'm very into this topic and I have come to the conclusion, possibly unfairly, but so far I think I'm right that um there are a lot of people out there who are like, I want to be an AI expert. Like this is a new technology, therefore I'm going to be an AI expert because someone's got to be the expert. It's going to
Right.
be me. And like I think a good example of this happening in the past was with blockchain, right? So like blockchain came out and suddenly all these people were blockchain experts and you sort of believe them because you're like, well, I'm not an expert. It must be this person who says they are, right? Um, so fortunately, having gotten into AI before the hype train left the station, I feel like a little bit better positioned to say that's bullshit. Like there's some
Yeah.
bullshit at play here. Yeah, there's a so I would say like whenever I see a panel of like 4 or 5 people on the stage, one person up there knows what they're talking about, and then everyone else speaks in a lot of platitudes of like, well, we need to be careful. Well, you need to, use this regular caution. Like if you hear a lot of those things, maybe take what they say with a grain of salt.
Excellent.
If someone speaks in more concrete terms, I would hazard to guess that they're the ones who know what they're saying a little bit more than the others. And that's something I would caution against as well. So like you're going to hear naysaying and this humming and hawing of like, oh, well, we need to be careful. Like not all voices are created equal, even if they've been given the platform, an equal share of the platform. So that would be like another caution I would
That's
sort of
great
throw out there.
advice. That's great advice. And I love that, that example of, maybe people that are a little too general, even if they do have that platform, right? If they can't be specific and drill down and give you those examples, maybe think twice.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's very rule of thummy. Like there's probably plenty of experts out there who like are going to have to speak in generalities, but I can't think of one that I've seen yet.
Very good. Thank you so much. All right, Alex, did I miss anything? Is there anything else that's gonna wake you up at 3 a.m. that
Um,
you should have said
hmm.
HealthSpark?
I don't think so. I don't think related to AI. I
This is
mean,
great. This is
I
great. Very
yeah,
informative.
I'm glad you think so. I do want to mention because I know we had talked in the past, and you're like, this is really cool, and I think some of the people I work with would want to know about this, the National Science Foundation thing. So, um, that program is it's designed for people who are research oriented. So that's going to be most of your listeners, right? Like it's going to be
Yeah,
medical
absolutely.
professionals.
Mhm.
In my case, like the law, there's economists, there's technologists, all kinds of people. But it's a grant program that is designed to help the research style person to move into an entrepreneur style mindset. The program we went through is called I-Core. I'm sure it stands for something, as everything does in, these programs. It's some acronym, but who cares? It's the NSF I-Core program.
Okay.
Um, that was a worthwhile program, but it was associated with, in many cases, phase one research funding, which
Wow.
is non-dilutive funding for entrepreneurs. And non-dilutive funding is, for those who don't know, is just basically like think of grants, right? Like they don't take any ownership of your company. Where in most cases, when you receive money for a entrepreneurial endeavor, it's in exchange for either debt or some portion of the company. Going through this phase one program, which I believe with the I-Core was a $10,000 grant, um, makes you eligible for the phase two funding, which is up to $2 million in non-dilutive funding per project. Um, I believe there are some phase one funding programs through SBIR and I'm forgetting the other one. I think it's like SBIT,
Okay.
um, that offer up to, I want to say, $100,000 in funding for phase one. And then any phase one program you go through makes you eligible to apply for phase two grant funding.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so if there's anyone out there who's like, hey, there should be an AI that does this, and they're like looking to do something, or they have some research they otherwise want to monetize, I would highly recommend they take a look at that.
That's amazing. So you went through the I-Core program.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for that, Alex. All
Yeah,
right.
you're
Well,
welcome.
I think that wraps up all my questions. Thank you so much for your time, Alex, today,
You're
and
welcome. Yeah.
for educating us on the Health Spark.
I really enjoyed it. And thanks again for having me, Ginger. Really
Uh,
enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Alex. We'll talk to you soon.